Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's writing workshop. I do apologize that this is a month late. I am the worst. But I did want to get this through to everyone on Kofi and just talk about dialogue. That seemed to be what everybody on Kofi was interested in this month. I'm really stoked for this writing workshop. Dialogue seems to be something that either everyone really loves or really hates. So hopefully by the end of this, if you struggle with dialogue, you'll have a good idea of what you've done wrong and how to fix it. So why does dialogue matter? There are definitely authors that are very prose heavy and they don't really do a lot of dialogue. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, why does it matter other than revealing character personality and mood, right? I think a lot of authors are under the assumption that dialogue only pertains to just characters, but it actually does a lot more when we're working on our novels. Dialogue drives plot, including conflict, decisions, and consequences, because somebody might say something to you that changes your mind. As a human being, we are very flippy, floppy, wishy washy kind of creatures, and that can happen a lot. So other people can influence your decisions. It can also break up prose because, as much as we do love prose, it can create a wall of text issue for readers, and breaking that up is very, very important. And then it also enhances immersion. We want our readers to feel like they have a GoPro strapped to either their head or a character's head, and they're just walking around in the world. Having dialogue is important because that's something that almost all humans do. And if not, people communicate in other ways other than with words, right? So, regardless of whether you use speech or not to communicate, that's just something that we inherently do. And without that, the story can feel very weird and very flat. What makes dialogue bad? When I'm reading, I always look out for when the little fictional people no longer sound like people. Even robots should have their own personality. A great example of this is TJ Klune's In the Lives of Puppets. That book is effectively 95% robots, and each robot has its own distinct voice. So, what breaks dialogue? What makes it bad or unusable? Overly formal or perfect grammar can make dialogue really boring. If you're writing historical fiction, that is obviously an exception. Historic writers sounded different than we do today. So if you're reading historic novels from the Gothic period or earlier, for example, a lot of speech is very meticulously crafted, which I think turns a lot of people off to the time period. But when we're talking about today, or we're creating characters that exist in today's world, those kinds of things can make people sound a little weird. If there is excessive exposition, that's also bad. So that becomes, I like to use the example of the Harry Potter fan fiction, My Immortal. If you've never read it, it's free to read on the internet. Please go and look at it. It is super funny. But the beginning of the fan fiction starts with the character describing herself, and it goes something along the lines of, my name is Raven Ebony Dementia Darkness Way, and I have blue eyes, and I have long raven black hair, and I look like Gerard Way. And if you don't know who that is, then get the out of here. And it's so funny. The writer, when they were making that fan fiction, was not intending it for it to come off that way. And because the character has such a bizarre, self skewed understanding of themselves, it is literally used as a prime example of what not to do for exposition and info dumping. And this kind of stuff can happen in dialogue as well. And so even if you're not describing the world around you with prose, you can accidentally do the same thing with dialogue. So say, for example, you have a fairy tale world and a character from outside of that world gets transported into it, right? We have a regular human in a very magical place and they don't know what they're doing there. The first character that they meet, if that character approaches that person and says, "Ah, yes, welcome to Totanatar, the world of magic. I will now explain to you for 45 minutes how magic works." And it becomes these massive blocks of dialogue where this guy is literally just like wizard dumping information at this main character. People are going to get very, very bored. Don't do that. If your characters don't use contraction or slang, that can become a problem. What's really interesting about this is you can actually invent slang for fantasy worlds or languages. We see fantasy show up all the time, fantasy slang, new slang, in our language base. For example, this is going to probably date this video, so if anybody is watching this YouTube video decades from now, I doubt it, but there's always a chance, we just have had the emergence of the word clanker to describe an AI or robot worker in the workforce that is stealing jobs. If this is a slur in the future, I deeply apologize to the sentient robots that this may offend. I am super sorry. As of right now, it's not a slur, but who knows? Maybe in the future it will be, right? So we got to keep an eye on that slang. Also using contractions. So instead of saying, we were not going to go to the store today, but we ultimately decided we would, that becomes, we weren't going to the store today, but we ultimately decided we would. Certain characters are going to use contractions more than others. If they tend to be more stuffy or formal, they probably won't use as many contractions. But even the stuffiest, most formal people from specific time periods did. So do your research. If you're doing historical fiction, listen to how people actually talked and talk to linguists. They will give you those answers. If there's a lack of subtext, that can be a problem. And this happens more in the dialogue tags or action descriptors that go along with the dialogue versus the dialogue itself. So if we have a character, for example, who is drinking an iced coffee and she says, well, I don't really want to go to the formal. And then the dialogue action is shortly after that, maybe Marissa rolled her eyes. Then the question the reader is left with is like, well, God, why does this girl have an attitude about going to the formal? Like, is she good? You know, the action itself, if that makes sense, the action itself will drive the way that the dialogue sounds in your mind versus if it was, well, I don't really want to go to the formal. Marissa's eyes dropped to the table. Okay, well, now she's sad about something, right? So it completely changes the way that the dialogue is read, and that subtext is very, very important. And if you have unrealistic responses or rhythm, that can just be really, really bad. Humans are kind of bad at speaking. That's just generally what we do. We are kind of awful. So when you're having dialogue in real life, if you ever have an instance in which the topic changes really quickly, people start talking about stuff that's completely random without any prompting. Like, of course, if you have a character who's like, Mikey just remembered that. It's like, oh, well, then of course, maybe Mikey will then change the conversation and they're going to say something instead about like, oh, I just remembered, right? And you can kind of just throw that in there. Normally, memories are triggered by stuff, so it'll feel a little bit less out of the blue for the reader. But also, too, having very short, clipped dialogue, like, would you like to go to the store? Yes, said Ember. Cool, said John. Let's go, said Ember. That's not a very realistic rhythm, and it feels not realistic in response either. You know, there's a million different ways that that could be said depending on the scene. Good dialogue sounds like, let's talk about it. For any book project, you'll need, oh, sorry, that's a, don't look at me. Can you tell I was editing slides? So ignore that. But good dialogue in general is going to have a lot of information that is going to make your people sound like actual people. So let's look at these from left to right here. We have first, it needs to be a real conversation. This conversation should not happen just to happen. These conversations are literary devices for us to drive our story forward. It needs to meet the story needs. And unless you're writing literary fiction, which is its own totally different thing, and that's not really what we're talking about here, we are writing probably some kind of speculative fiction or romance or a genre-based fiction. So anything but literary fiction. The dialogue needs to push the story forward in some way, right? If it doesn't, why are they talking? As one of my script writing professors said, is if it doesn't do anything to move the story forward, cut it. And this was a guy that worked for Universal for like 20 years, so I would probably trust him with my life. If the dialogue builds character, reveals something about the person to the reader, that's great. That's exactly what we need it there for. And it also needs to have flavor. It needs to show the personality of the person actually speaking. Then dialogue needs to be distinctive. Again, we got to have that spice for each character. We need to know what their words are that they lean on. Like I say rad or Yeah, rad is actually a great one, a good example for me. I literally shocked somebody the other day. They were Gen X, I think, and I said, "Yo, that's so rad." And then they looked at me and they were like, "What era are you from?" Because I look a lot younger than I actually am, and that confused them. They were very confused. But like somebody today might not say like Cowabunga, my dudes, because that is an older type of slang that is no longer used. But maybe you have a character who's really obsessed with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or grew up in the 90s and they might be more on that Cowabunga train. You don't know. And then again, the slang can also be impacted by your fantasy world as well, or your science fiction world. Make up slang for each unique universe that you create. Readers need to be able to also tell who's speaking, even if there is no dialogue tag. So if everybody starts to kind of sound the same, you probably have a little bit of an issue. Most humans speak with unique cadences. They have unique word choice that they use, unique contractions. So you start to kind of Frankenstein those together and combine them, and that is going to be what creates a unique dialogue experience. Finally, exaggerate. We need to have subtext rich stuff. What are bodies doing? What is the facial expression on the person? That is going to tell us much more than the actual dialogue itself. Also, it needs to be tighter, punchier, and more expressive than regular dialogue. Humans go on a lot of tangents. We are very good at that. It's easy for us to lose our train of thought. Obviously, your readers don't want to be stuck in I'm trapped in train of thought land. So keeping your dialogue punchy, and when you go back and revise it, like you can definitely first draft just get out as much dialogue as you think that you need, but on the second pass or third pass, really trimming down that dialogue and making it crisp is going to be what you want. You want punchy. We want it to be punchy. And that leads us into what is the difference really then between the way that we speak in real life and actual dialogue. Dialogue is going to feel clean, but also natural. It's a very difficult balance to maintain, but that's what several drafts are for. And also what a potentially like a developmental editor or line editor is for. Is the developmental editor is going to make sure your characters feel real. The line editor is going to make sure that the dialogue feels natural, right? Those two things work together. Dialogue should also be focused and with purpose. Again, if it's, a bunch of people, say, standing in the line at a coffee shop and you have two characters that are arguing, if they're talking about the weather, if they're talking about politics, unless it's relevant to the story, if they're talking about what their dog did that morning, like those things are probably not necessary, essential. I almost tried to combine two words there. For the story, we can just go ahead and omit it. It needs to be a little cleaner than that. It should also have intentional rhythm, be clear in intent, and have natural responses that drive the story forward. We mentioned these things a little bit already. Versus regular dialogue is full of filler, it's very off topic, there's lots of interruptions, lots of repetition, it's vague, and it's very context heavy. Like if you took the dialogue out of real life and you set it aside, would people have any idea what you were talking about? Probably not. Here are some tips to avoid robotic sounding dialogue. Robots can sound like robots, but everybody else can't. Use loose speech. We got contractions, we got slang. Research your time period. This is very important. As an old man at this point, as somebody who is a younger millennial, so not the oldest I could possibly be, I've been seeing a lot of issues where either one of two things happened. You have an older millennial or older trying to write Gen Z, and it is as if they have never spoken to another human in their whole life. And the dialogue is so bad. All of a sudden, you're getting like, wow, that person is sus. No cap. And it's like, do you know what you're even saying? Do you even have any idea what half of these words even mean? And the answer is most of the time they don't. So they're trying to write for younger audiences. And I see this a lot with children too. When people try and write children, it's like, have you ever spoken to an actual child in your whole life? The answer is probably not. But it can also happen in the reverse, where you have younger writers or writers in general, who are writing for different time periods, and this can be contemporary or historical. And there's not enough research done on how the actual speaking was done at that time, and so then that can make a huge issue when all of a sudden you have something that's supposed to be historical fiction, and your pirate sounds like Johnny Depp. When maybe they're like a South African pirate, like, or Central or South African pie. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, oh, that's not even the right region. Like, why does this person sound like this? Or you have a Russian pirate or a Chinese pirate. There's so many things to take into consideration when thinking about how your person speaks. And then, of course, read it aloud. If you read it aloud and it sounds weird, it's probably because it is weird and you need to revise your dialogue. Cut exposition out. We talked a little bit about this before. Don't info dump. Keep responses natural and make sure you're only including necessary information. And finally, take a breath in dialogue, especially when conversations are really heavy. There's a lot of people just sitting there like trying to process. They're trying to think about what to say next, and the mood can be really heavy. So include silence, include those beats, include the awkwardness. Explain how the silence feels to your main character. Is it a comfortable silence? Because in a lot of romances, it's like, man, I'm sitting next to this person and I'm saying nothing at all, but like, wow, this is the best silence I've ever had in my whole life. I feel so at home in this silence. Versus if you're having a conversation that's really, really heavy, the silence is going to feel like it drags on forever and ever and ever until somebody says something, right? Also, embrace imperfection. People are going to be cutting each other off in sentences. They are going to be stumbling over words. They're going to be trying to grasp at thoughts, starting clauses, not really finishing it. Those kinds of hiccups make people sound real. And that leads us into character, voice, and distinction. This is what people struggle with, I think, the most. How do we make each individual character sound like their own person? A person's way of speaking is like a fingerprint. It comes down to word choice, sentence structure, pet phrases or filler words, and cultural background or profession. Examples could include a doctor and a mechanic are going to sound completely different. A child versus somebody who is of retirement age, completely different. A villain versus the main character's best friend, completely different, right? So thinking about the context and who they are and why they're there is going to shape that a lot. And this means that you need to know your characters really, really well before you go and write them. You need to effectively be able to sit down and interview them before you start your manuscript. And taking little things into account can make a huge difference. Like knowing it's like, oh, well, my character speaks Russian on the phone to their family, but they don't speak Russian in person because they don't really know anybody that speaks Russian. It's kind of their household thing and not their in public thing. Or, oh, this person died in 1991 and so uses slang from the late 80s, early 90s, and is faking an accent. All of these things are so important. If you can name that character in the comments, you get a little gold star sticker for this class, naming which character I'm talking about. Yeah, making sure that you know who they are. Because as soon as you can close your eyes and hear them, it's a game changer. That's going to change a lot about your writing. And it's a very intuitive thing. I realize I sound like, gosh, who is it? Ian McKellen's Sir Ian McKellen. I think he did like a sketch on acting. Somebody asked him how do you act, and he says, I just pretend to be the character. And it's like, that explains nothing. That does not help me. But in this particular case, it's a lot of acting things out. Really, if you haven't taken any acting classes, maybe that will help. Go and do improv classes, acting classes, and they will help you understand what you need to do to really tap into somebody else, step into their clothes, and just go be them. And that can help improve your writing. Another thing that can help improve dialogue is a lot of tension. Again, it needs to drive the story forward. And what drives their story forward? Tension and conflict. Those are essential. If there is no tension, again, literary fiction aside, if there's no tension or conflict, it will not move the story forward. The subtext will help with that because if people are not agreeing, they're going to be showing it in their face. They're going to be showing it in their body language. Dialogue is just chess with acting. And people are constantly playing like 4D chess with each other, and it always backfires. It often results in people not communicating very well with each other because people are speaking directly or indirectly, and the directness might hurt somebody's feelings, or maybe being indirect causes the problem. People shift topics because they avoid things that they don't want to talk about, and people are sarcastic. For example, somebody saying, I'm fine, when asked, like, how are you? Versus, I said I'm fine. two completely different tones in that particular sentence. And I said I'm fine is going to drive the characters probably into some kind of confrontation, and that makes the story juicy. And that's what we want. Body language is going to be another thing that is going to be important. And this is kind of the subtextual element. This is what's going on in the background. Dialogue beats are actions that break up speech. What we don't want is a talking head situation. So that what that looks like in fiction is, again, say you have two characters in a coffee shop, they're both sitting at a table. You have one character, we're going to call her Sarah, and the other is her sister Emily. Okay, so Sarah says, "I love my caramel macchiato," she said. "Me too," Emily replied. "I like caramel macchiatos a lot." "That's awesome," Sarah said. "Do you need help with your homework?" "No, I'm fine," Emily said. It's so boring. So it starts to get really repetitive and really unclear of what's going on. And effectively, the problem is that if we were to take that dialogue, remove it from that coffee shop, and transplant it somewhere else, like maybe they're drinking caramel macchiatos in a prison. I don't know. They could be in a sci-fi space colony where this is the last caramel macchiato on Earth. Anything could be happening, but without that extra context, we have nothing. So you do not want to go with the he said, she asked, they asked, I replied, I sighed, I laughed. Avoid those, not necessarily at all costs, but make sure you're not stuck in a loop where that's all that's going on. Add emotion, add that pacing, add realism to break things up. Are people fiddling with stuff? Are they moving back and forth? Are they talking with their hands? Are they making weird faces? For example, "I don't trust you," she said, folding her arms, is so heavy on telling. It doesn't really give us an insight into how this person feels other than her directly being like, "I don't trust you," which is really straightforward and very much show versus tell, versus "whatever," he muttered, kicking a loose tile. That says a lot about effectively a grumpy teenager who doesn't want to have a conversation, or something has hurt his feelings, maybe, and we don't know. Those beats are going to be what implies tone. The beats are going to come from body language. Robots are people too. Don't forget that when you're writing characters who just generally are non human. This applies to aliens, fantasy creatures, or robots. Anything that is not us, each culture is going to shape how these people talk and whether or not they sound realistic based on the context and the culture that you've given them as the author. For example, taking robots as the springboard here, robots might be personally formal or stilted. They might use lack of contraction. They might have more precise vocabulary. They might use repetitive sentence structures. But you need to give them emotional arcs or evolving speech if appropriate. Each character is going to be different. Again, to go back to TJ Klune, Rambo is a Roomba with anxiety. Rambo does not sound like a typical robot in fiction, versus Nurse Ratched does. She speaks in a very monotone, very clipped way, but is also incredibly violent. So they still have personalities. I think about my own character, Atari, from an upcoming science fiction. He's effectively a robot with trauma. So, what does that look like? And the same thing can apply to fantasy characters or alien characters in the same way. How does your alien character learning whatever trade language you have in your science fiction world impact the way that they speak? Do they have heavy accents? Is the grammar hard? Think about how humans interact with each other. Like, I'm going to have issues speaking Mandarin Chinese. A person who speaks Mandarin Chinese is going to have issues speaking English, because tonally, our languages are completely different, and that's going to impact how people sound. So, if you'd like to do any exercises, I have a couple of them for you that I think would be rather fun. The first exercise is going to be fix that line. And by that, I mean, I want you to fix this line by following two steps. Here's the line: "I do not want to go to the market. It's hot outside. We should stay home." Now you need to fix it. This is incredibly flat dialogue and is very weird. So first, you're going to pick a character. This can be any character from any period, any work, yours or others. Say it's Princess Jasmine from Disney's Aladdin. Anything could be the possibility here. You can do whatever you like. Then you need to add some kind of emotion. Is the person angry, sad, tired, anxious? What's going on that's making this person not want to go to the market? And then finally add an action beat to that dialogue to make it feel weight, right? Once you've done that, put it in the comments below. If you're on YouTube, if you're seeing this in the future, or if you're on Ko-fi and you want to drop yours in the comments too, I'd love to see it and see how you spin this particular line. The second exercise is going to be a prompt. Write 2 to 3 lines of dialogue between two characters. Again, it can be any characters of your choice. Now, once you've written those dialogues pieces, strip the dialogue tags. So get rid of anything that's like he said, she whispered, they laughed, etc. Get rid of all of those so that there's no descriptions, no information about who's talking. Can we still tell who is who? And if the answer is no, go back and rewrite it. As always, nothing is set in stone when we write. We have the ability to go back and redraft. So feel free, again, to post your responses to these exercises in the comments. I'd love to see them and be able to comment on them. Remember to keep the environment friendly in the comments if we are on the public internet. Please don't be mean. A good way to approach critique and comments is to post what you liked and then suggest changes and then be friendly. Those are good ways to go. Remember, you can always fall into common dialogue traps. This is kind of my final note for this whole thing. Stay away from info dumping. Don't use names too much. Like, we don't need to say, like, John, let us go and get a coffee. Let's go get a coffee is fine. Don't worry about it. Don't have unrealistic monologues. Sometimes a villain will monologue, and that's totally fine. But normal people don't tend to do that. Make sure that your character sounds distinct from your own voice. And be sure to always drive the story with tension. Now let's write some strong dialogue. Dialogue is one of my favorite things to do, and especially if you're a screenwriter, you don't really have a lot of prose. You're working effectively with only dialogue. So let me know what you think about the exercises. Ask questions if you have them, either on the Ko-fi or on YouTube. And I'm so excited to see anybody's pieces that have to do with dialogue. Tell me what you like about writing it, what you don't like about writing it, or if there's anything that you struggle with. So thank you so much for sitting through this presentation. Hopefully it helped, and I will see you next time.